The cardboard box hit Graham Holloway's desk before anyone realized what he was doing. The conversations around the conference room faded one by one. Someone stopped typing. Someone else quietly lowered a coffee cup. At the far end of the glass-walled room, Vivian Sinclair folded her arms, waiting for the single father to laugh, apologize, or back down. He did none of those things. Instead, Graham pulled a framed photo of his daughter from the corner of his workstation and laid it carefully inside the box. "I thought you were making a point," one manager whispered. "I am," Graham answered without looking up. 5 minutes earlier, Vivian had looked him straight in the eye. "If one school recital matters more than this company," she had said in a calm, controlled voice, "maybe you should quit." She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. Everyone in Sinclair Logistics knew what those words meant. No one quit this company voluntarily. Especially not someone like Graham. 41 years old. A widower. A single father raising a teenage daughter. A man with a mortgage, medical bills, and exactly one paycheck supporting everything. Vivian had expected silence. She got a cardboard box instead. "Before we go any further, I'd love to know something about you. How old are you, where are you watching from, and have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads like this?" No one spoke as Graham unplugged his computer. His hands weren't shaking. That surprised him more than anyone else. He wasn't fearless. He was terrified. He simply knew there was a difference between being afraid and pretending he had no choice. Outside the conference room windows, forklifts rolled across the distribution yard while trucks lined up for afternoon departures. The company never slowed down. For nearly 13 years, either had Graham. He had missed birthday lunches because shipments ran late. He had watched school concerts through blurry phone recordings sent by other parents. He had promised his daughter Lily, "Next time." There had always been another next time. Until this morning. Lily was 13 now, and after months of rehearsals she had finally earned the lead solo in her middle school's spring music showcase. She hadn't begged him to come. That hurt even more. She had simply smiled over breakfast and said, "I know you're busy, Dad." "It's okay." It wasn't okay. That quiet acceptance had stayed with him all day. So when he asked for one afternoon away from work, it wasn't a demand. It wasn't even an argument. It was the first boundary he had tried to draw in years. Vivian looked at schedules. Graham looked at the clock. Two people standing in the same room, measuring success by completely different things. Now his office keys rested beside the family photo inside the cardboard box. He glanced around one last time. This building held 13 years of his life. It also held 13 years of excuses. For the first time since his wife had died, Graham wasn't walking away because he had a better plan. He was walking away because staying had quietly become the one decision he could no longer defend, to his daughter or to himself. The automatic doors slid open, and Graham Holloway stepped into the cool afternoon air carrying nothing but a cardboard box and the weight of a decision he couldn't undo. The parking lot looked exactly the same as it had every weekday for the past 13 years. Rows of pickup trucks. Delivery vans. Employees rushing back inside with coffees in their hands. Life at Sinclair Logistics kept moving as if nothing had happened. Only Graham's life had changed. He unlocked his aging blue Ford F-150 and carefully placed the box on the passenger seat. The framed picture of Lily leaned against a coffee mug she had painted in elementary school years ago. Across the bottom, in crooked blue letters, were the words "World's Okayest Dad." She had laughed when she gave it to him. "It's funny because you're never home long enough to drink coffee." At the time, he'd laughed too. Now the memory stung. His phone buzzed before he started the engine. 3 missed calls. 2 text messages. Every one of them came from coworkers. "Are you serious? Tell me you're just making a point. Vivian expects you'll cool off by tomorrow." He read every message. He answered none. For years, Graham had built a reputation as the dependable one. If a shipment fell behind schedule, he stayed. If someone called in sick, he covered the shift. If a storm shut down highways overnight, he slept in the office instead of driving home. Everyone admired that dedication. No one ever asked what it cost. The drive to Lily's school took nearly 40 minutes. Normally he would have still been inside the operations center, staring at shipping forecasts while promising himself he'd leave early next week. Today, for the first time in years, he arrived before the parking lot filled with parents. He sat behind the steering wheel without getting out. His heart wasn't racing anymore. Instead, an uncomfortable silence settled over him. He had just walked away from the highest salary he'd ever earned. The health insurance. The retirement plan. The predictable routine that had held his life together after his wife, Emily, died 8 years earlier. Without those things, who was he supposed to be? His phone rang again. This time it wasn't work. It was Lily. "Hey, Dad?" Her voice sounded lighter than usual. "Everything okay?" Graham stared through the windshield toward the school auditorium. "I need to tell you something after the performance." There was a brief pause. "You sound nervous." "I am." "Did something happen?" "It can wait." She didn't press him. "Okay," she said softly. "I'm glad you're here." 4 simple words. "I'm glad you're here." No performance review. No annual bonus. No promotion. Nothing Sinclair Logistics had ever given him felt as valuable as hearing those words. Inside the auditorium, folding chairs scraped across the floor while families searched for seats. Parents carried flowers, balloons, and cameras. Graham found a place in the 3rd row. A music teacher walked onto the stage, welcoming everyone before introducing the students. Then Lily appeared. She looked older than he remembered that morning. Confident. Nervous. Ready. When her eyes scanned the audience, they stopped. She saw him. For just a second, surprise crossed her face before it melted into a smile so genuine it almost broke him. He realized something in that moment. For years he'd believed being a good father meant making sure Lily never worried about money. He had never stopped to ask whether she'd been worrying about something else entirely. The performance ended with a standing ovation. Parents crowded the aisles, hugging their children and taking pictures. Lily ran toward him. "You actually made it. I told you I'd try." She shook her head with a grin. "No, Dad. You made it." The words landed harder than she knew. Outside the school, they stopped beside his truck. Lily noticed the cardboard box through the passenger side window. She frowned. "Why is your desk stuff in your truck?" Graham took a slow breath. "I quit my job today." She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him for several quiet seconds, trying to understand what those words would mean for both of them. The afternoon breeze carried children's laughter across the parking lot. For the first time since leaving Sinclair Logistics, Graham felt the real weight of his decision. Walking away had been the easy part. Now he had to build a life that proved it hadn't been a mistake. That night either of them slept well. The apartment was quiet except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of cars passing outside. Graham lay awake on the living room couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same question over and over. Had he finally done the right thing? Or had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? Around 6 the next morning, he gave up trying to sleep. He started a pot of coffee, only to remember he no longer had anywhere to rush off to. For more than a decade, every weekday had followed the same rhythm. Shower. Coffee. Check overnight emails. Leave before sunrise. Now the inbox could wait. The silence couldn't. Lily walked into the kitchen wearing an oversized sweatshirt and rubbing her eyes. "You've been up long?" Graham smiled weakly. "Long enough to burn the first batch of coffee." She poured herself a glass of orange juice and leaned against the counter. "So, are we okay?" It wasn't a question about money. It wasn't even about his job. She was asking about them. Graham answered honestly. "I don't know yet." She nodded, almost relieved that he hadn't pretended everything was fine. "We'll figure it out." Those 4 words sounded strangely familiar. The day before, she had told him she was glad he came to the concert. Now she was reminding him they were still a team. After Lily left for school, Graham opened his laptop at the kitchen table. His resume hadn't been updated in almost 7 years. He stared at the screen for nearly 20 minutes before typing a single word. The skills were easy. Operations planning, logistics management, vendor coordination, crisis response. The difficult part was the line asking why he had left his previous employer. He deleted 3 different answers before closing the document altogether. Outside, a delivery truck stopped in front of the neighboring building. The driver jumped out, scanned a package, waved at someone on the porch, then drove away. For a moment Graham missed the familiar rhythm of warehouses, loading docks, and dispatch radios. Work had become more than a paycheck. It had become the place where he hid from everything else. Later that afternoon, he decided to clean out the hallway closet. It wasn't something he'd planned to do. He simply needed to keep his hands busy. Inside were old winter coats, unopened boxes, and a dusty plastic storage bin he hadn't touched in years. He carried it into the living room and lifted the lid. On top sat a folded hospital blanket. Beneath it were greeting cards, family photo albums, and a small envelope with Emily's handwriting. His chest tightened instantly. He almost closed the box again. Instead, he sat on the floor. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside was a note written during one of Emily's chemotherapy treatments. The paper had yellowed around the edges. He recognized every curve of her handwriting. She hadn't written about illness. She hadn't written about fear. She had written about Lily. About birthdays. About scraped knees. About first dances. About graduations she knew she might never see. Near the bottom of the page, one sentence caught his attention. Don't build your whole life around losing me. Build it around raising her. Graham read the line again. Then again. He couldn't remember seeing those words before. Maybe he had. Maybe he simply hadn't been ready to understand them. For years he had convinced himself that staying at Sinclair Logistics honored Emily because it was the company that had given their family stability after they got married. Now he wondered if he had confused loyalty with fear. Fear of changing. Fear of starting over. Fear of admitting that the life he had carefully preserved no longer looked anything like the future Emily would have wanted for Lily. That evening, Lily came home carrying a stack of homework. She found her father sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by old photographs. One picture showed a much younger Graham laughing with Emily at a county fair, both of them soaked after riding a water ride. Lily picked it up and smiled. I've never seen this one. Graham looked at the photo for a long moment before handing it to her. There are a lot of things I packed away because I thought looking at them would hurt too much. Lily gently placed the picture back on the floor. Maybe keeping them packed away hurt even more. Either of them spoke after that. The room remained quiet, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of a conversation they should have started a long time ago. Monday morning arrived, and Sinclair Logistics ran exactly as it always had. Trucks rolled through the gates before sunrise. Forklifts crossed the warehouse floor with practiced precision. Monitors flashed shipment numbers by the second. From the executive office overlooking the distribution center, Vivian Sinclair watched the operation like she did every morning. Efficient. Predictable. Profitable. Yet something felt different. She didn't notice it in the numbers. She noticed it in the conversations. Managers who usually walked into meetings with reports and forecasts now lingered outside conference rooms, speaking in lower voices than usual. When the weekly operations meeting began, Vivian immediately sensed a hesitation. Let's get started, she said. No one moved. Finally, Operations Director Mark Delaney cleared his throat. People are still talking about Graham. Vivian didn't look up from her tablet. They'll move on. I'm not sure. They will. That answer caught her attention. Mark wasn't emotional. He was known for dealing in facts. He didn't just leave. Mark continued. People keep asking why someone who's been here 13 years walked away without another job. Vivian leaned back in her chair. He made a personal decision. Maybe. Mark paused. Or maybe everyone else is wondering whether they'd make the same decision if they ever reached their limit. The room felt quiet. For the first time in years, Vivian realized the discussion wasn't really about Graham anymore. It was about everyone still sitting around the table. After the meeting ended, she left her office instead of returning to another video conference. That alone surprised several employees. She rarely walked through the warehouse unless there was a client visit. This morning she walked without an audience. She passed loading docks where workers loaded trailers against impossible deadlines. She stopped near a break room where two supervisors quickly changed the subject as she approached. "Don't stop talking," Vivian said. The two men exchanged uncertain looks. One finally spoke. "My daughter's birthday was last month." Vivian waited. "I got there just before they cut the cake." He shrugged. "I guess that's better than missing it." The words stayed with her as she continued walking. A few minutes later she noticed a bulletin board covered with family photos employees had pinned up over the years. Graduations. Fishing trips. Little League games. Christmas mornings. In one corner hung a faded picture of Graham standing beside Lily at an elementary school science fair. She remembered seeing that photo years ago. Back then it had simply been another decoration in the building. Today it felt different. Not because she suddenly knew Graham's life. Because she realized she had never tried to. Back in her office, Vivian opened Graham's personnel file. Performance reviews. Attendance records. Promotions. Awards. Every measurable achievement was documented with remarkable detail. What wasn't documented anywhere was the cost of earning them. There was no file for missed recitals. No report for broken promises. No spreadsheet measuring the distance between a father and his daughter. For the first time since Graham carried that cardboard box out of the building, Vivian closed her laptop without opening the next meeting agenda. The company was still operating exactly as designed. For the first time in her career, she found herself wondering whether that had been the problem all along. 3 days passed before Graham received the first interview invitation. It wasn't glamorous. A regional manufacturing company needed someone to coordinate shipping schedules and inventory. The salary was nearly 30% lower than what he'd earned at Sinclair Logistics, and the benefits weren't nearly as generous. Still, he ironed a blue button-down shirt that had been hanging untouched in his closet and drove across town with a folder tucked under his arm. The interview lasted less than an hour. The hiring manager thanked him for coming, promised to be in touch, and offered the same polite smile Graham had seen countless times throughout his career. He walked back to his truck knowing exactly what it meant. There were younger candidates. Cheaper candidates. People who hadn't just walked away from one of the biggest logistics companies in the state. For the first time since resigning, doubt found a voice. Maybe Vivian had been right. Maybe responsibility wasn't about being present. Maybe responsibility was simply paying the bills, no matter what it cost. He sat in the parking lot for several minutes before starting the engine. Instead of driving home, he pulled into a small park a few blocks away. Children filled the playground while parents sat on nearby benches, talking over paper cups of coffee. Graham realized he couldn't remember the last time he had seen a weekday afternoon without looking at it through an office window. His phone vibrated. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Holloway?" "Speaking. My name is Diane Foster. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Vivian Sinclair." Graham closed his eyes for a moment. "I'm not interested in coming back." "I understand. This isn't a job offer." "Then what is it?" "Ms. Sinclair would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you privately." There was a long pause. "You don't owe her anything," Diane added. "But she's asking." Graham looked across the playground. A little boy had fallen from the monkey bars. Before anyone else could react, his father crossed the mulch in 3 quick steps, lifted him up, brushed the dirt from his knees, and the two of them laughed as if nothing terrible had happened. Such a small moment. One he'd missed hundreds of times with Lily. When? Graham finally asked. Tomorrow afternoon. I'll think about it. He ended the call without making a promise. That evening, Lily was finishing algebra homework at the kitchen table while Graham chopped vegetables for dinner. I got a call today, he said. From who? My old company. She looked up immediately. They want you back? I don't know. Would you go? Graham didn't answer right away. Instead, he focused on slicing a bell pepper into careful strips. I honestly don't know. Lily closed her textbook. When Mom got sick. She stopped, choosing her words carefully. You worked extra hours because we needed the money. Graham nodded. I understood that. I know. But after she died. She looked down at the table. You kept working like she was still sick. The knife stopped moving. The kitchen became painfully quiet. I never wanted to make you feel alone, Graham said softly. I know you didn't. She smiled, but there was sadness behind it. I just think, somewhere along the way, surviving became your whole life. Those words stayed with him long after dinner. Later that night, he found himself sitting on the apartment balcony with Emily's letter folded inside his pocket. He read the final lines again beneath the porch light. Don't build your whole life around losing me. Build it around raising her. He finally understood something he had missed all these years. Emily hadn't wanted him to preserve the life they had built together. She had wanted him to keep growing after she was gone. The next afternoon, Graham agreed to meet Vivian. Not because he wanted his old job back. Not because he wanted an apology. He needed to find out whether closing that chapter meant walking away in anger, or leaving it behind. With nothing left unsaid. Across town, Vivian stood alone in a conference room that suddenly felt much larger than she remembered. For the first time in her career, she wasn't preparing to negotiate a contract or defend quarterly numbers. She was waiting for a conversation she couldn't control. And neither of them knew that what would be said in the next hour had far less to do with the job than with two people finally questioning the beliefs that had shaped their lives for years. Vivian Sinclair was already standing when Graham walked into the conference room. The room overlooked the same warehouse where they had spent countless hours chasing deadlines, solving problems, and measuring success in numbers. Today, either of them looked out the window. Thank you for coming, Vivian said. Graham nodded but remained standing. You said this wasn't about offering my job back. It isn't. For a few seconds, silence settled between them. It was the first conversation they had ever shared without laptops, reports, or managers filling the room. Vivian finally broke the silence. I owe you an apology. Graham didn't respond. She continued. I embarrassed you in front of your colleagues. I made assumptions about your life that weren't mine to make. I appreciate you saying that. But? There isn't a but. An apology matters. He pulled out a chair and sat down. It just doesn't change my decision. Vivian accepted the answer with a slow nod. I figured it wouldn't. She slid a folder across the table. Graham looked at it but didn't touch it. What's this? A separation agreement. He raised an eyebrow. It includes additional compensation beyond what you're legally entitled to. And in return? There is a confidentiality clause. He let out a quiet breath. So no one hears what happened. Vivian didn't deny it. It's intended to protect the company. Graham rested both hands on the table. For a moment he thought about the unpaid bills waiting at home. The mortgage. Lily's school expenses. The uncertainty that had followed him every morning since he resigned. A larger check would make life easier. It would also ask him to pretend the problem had never existed. He slowly pushed the folder back across the table. I'm not signing it. Vivian looked at him carefully. Even if it helps your daughter? My daughter is exactly why I can't. She remained silent. Graham continued in the same calm voice he had used the day he packed his desk. If I tell Lily that some things matter more than money, I can't turn around and sell my silence because life got uncomfortable. The words hung between them. For the first time in years, Vivian found herself with nothing persuasive left to say. Instead, she asked a question she had never asked any employee before. "What would you have wanted me to do differently?" Graham looked toward the warehouse below. Forklifts crossed loading lanes. Workers hurried between trailers. Everything looked exactly as it had the day he left. "I didn't need special treatment." He turned back toward her. "I needed one afternoon." Vivian lowered her eyes. "It wasn't really about the recital." "No. It was about someone believing work could always come first." He nodded. "I spent years believing that too." That answer surprised her. "You don't blame me for all of it?" Graham shook his head. "I made choices." He paused. "I kept telling myself I was sacrificing for Lily." His voice softened. "The truth is, after my wife died, work became the one place where I always knew what to do." He gave a tired smile. "Shipments make sense. Grief doesn't." Vivian listened without interrupting. She had expected anger. Instead, she found honesty. "I hid inside my job," Graham admitted. "It gave me a schedule. It gave me control. It also gave me 1,000 excuses to miss parts of my daughter's life." For the first time since becoming CEO, Vivian saw a resignation not as the end of employment, but as the end of a story she had never bothered to understand. She closed the folder. "I'm withdrawing the agreement." Graham looked surprised. "You don't have to." "No." She stood and picked it up. "I do." She walked to the paper shredder beside the credenza. Without another word, she fed every page into the machine. Neither of them spoke while the blades reduced the contract to thin white strips. When the noise stopped, Vivian turned back toward him. "I can't ask you to come back." "You wouldn't." "No." A faint smile crossed Graham's face. "I wouldn't." He stood, extending his hand. "This doesn't fix everything. I know. But it's a better place to leave things." Vivian shook his hand. As Graham walked out of the conference room for the second, and final, time, he realized something unexpected. He hadn't come there to win an argument. He had come to leave without carrying bitterness into the next chapter of his life. And for the first time since packing that cardboard box, he felt like he finally had. The call came on a Thursday morning while Graham was replacing a burned-out light bulb in the apartment kitchen. "Mr. Holloway? This is Graham. My name is Rebecca Nolan from Harbor Technical Institute. We interviewed you on Monday." He leaned against the counter, holding the phone a little tighter. "We'd like to offer you the position." For a moment, he closed his eyes. The salary was exactly what he expected, far less than he had earned at Sinclair Logistics. The benefits were modest. The title wasn't impressive. He would spend more time teaching young logistics coordinators than managing million-dollar operations. It wasn't the career he had imagined for himself. But when Rebecca explained the schedule, one sentence stood out. "You'll be home every evening. We rarely work weekends." Graham smiled before he even realized it. "I'd be honored to accept." After hanging up, he stood in the quiet apartment. A few weeks earlier, he would have judged the offer by the paycheck. Now he found himself measuring something entirely different. Time. That afternoon, he picked Lily up from school instead of waiting for the bus to bring her home. She climbed into the truck, tossed her backpack onto the back seat, and looked at him with surprise. "What are you doing here? I thought I'd steal 15 minutes of your afternoon." She laughed. "I like this version of unemployment." "So do I." When he told her about the new job, she listened carefully. "Does it pay enough?" "It pays less." She frowned. "Are you worried?" "Of course." He looked through the windshield before continuing. "But being worried isn't the same as making the wrong choice." Lily nodded slowly. "I think Mom would like this job." Graham smiled. "I've been thinking the same thing." Across town, Vivian faced a very different afternoon. The executive conference room was unusually full. Department heads, board members, and senior managers filled every chair. A quarterly performance review had turned into something else entirely. Vivian stood at the front of the room without the usual presentation slides behind her. Instead of beginning with revenue projections, she started with a single sentence. We've been measuring efficiency without measuring its cost. Several board members exchanged puzzled looks. One of them spoke first. Our numbers are strong. They are. So what's the problem? Vivian looked around the room. We've built a culture where people quietly believe their families always come second. Another executive leaned forward. That's called commitment. No, Vivian answered calmly. That's called imbalance. The room grew noticeably colder. One board member flipped through financial reports. If you're proposing shorter hours or more flexibility, productivity will suffer. Maybe for a while. And investors? They'll ask difficult questions. So why risk it? Vivian thought about the cardboard box. About a framed photograph of a teenage girl. About a man who had calmly walked away instead of negotiating. Because if our best people believe the only way to keep their families is to leave this company, then our numbers are already lying to us. The discussion lasted nearly 3 hours. No dramatic vote. No applause. No instant agreement. Only difficult conversations that should have happened years earlier. Late that evening, Graham stopped by the grocery store after signing his employment paperwork. He compared prices more carefully than he used to. He put one brand back on the shelf and chose a cheaper one. He skipped the steak they used to buy on special occasions and picked up chicken instead. Nothing about the trip felt glamorous. Yet when he arrived home, Lily was already setting the table. You made it before dinner again. I did. She grinned. We might have to make this a habit. As they ate, the conversation wandered from homework to music to the stray dog that had been wandering near the school parking lot. Ordinary topics. Ordinary laughter. Ordinary moments. Graham suddenly realized that for years he had mistaken extraordinary income for an extraordinary life. Now, sitting across from his daughter with nowhere else he needed to be, he understood something far more valuable. A different job hadn't rescued him. A billionaire hadn't changed his future. The life he was building wasn't the result of one dramatic decision. It was being rebuilt one ordinary evening at a time. 2 months into his new job, Graham noticed something unexpected. He no longer checked the time every 15 minutes. At Harbor Technical Institute, his days were busy, but they ended when they were supposed to. Instead of tracking freight across 3 time zones, he spent his afternoons helping students understand why a delayed shipment could affect an entire supply chain. They asked questions he hadn't heard in years. They were curious instead of rushed. It wasn't exciting work in the way Sinclair logistics had been. It was quieter. And somehow, that quiet had begun to heal something inside him. One Saturday morning, Lily walked into the kitchen carrying a roll of packing tape. I've got an idea, she said. Graham looked up from his coffee. Should I be worried? Probably. She smiled. I think it's time. He knew exactly what she meant before she said another word. The storage boxes. For years they had been stacked neatly in the hallway closet, then moved to the bedroom, then pushed into a corner after every apartment cleaning. They followed them through every season like silent roommates either of them acknowledged. Boxes filled with Emily's sweaters. Emily's notebooks. Emily's favorite coffee mug with the chipped handle. Hospital paperwork. Birthday cards. Photo albums. Tiny pieces of a life that had stopped moving while theirs kept going. Graham carried the first box into the living room and set it on the floor. For several minutes either of them reached for the lid. Finally Lily broke the silence. You don't have to keep everything to remember. Mom. He looked at her. When did you get so wise? I've had a good teacher. He laughed softly. I'm not sure that's true. It is. She sat cross-legged beside the box. You just needed a little more time to believe your own lessons. Together they began sorting through the memories. One pile to keep. One pile to donate. One pile for family members who would treasure them. There were tears. There was laughter. Emily had apparently loved terrible souvenir shops during road trips. They found 3 different snow globes from places none of them had ever intended to visit. Lily held one up and laughed. "Mom really bought this. She said every vacation needed one thing we'd regret spending money on." The laughter came easily. Not because the grief had disappeared. Because it no longer frightened them. Near the bottom of the final box, Graham found a small leather journal. Inside the front cover, Emily had written a single sentence. "A home isn't the place where people stay the longest. It's the place where they keep choosing each other." He closed the journal and stared at the words for a long time. For years he had believed home meant the house he struggled to afford. Then he thought it meant the company that gave him security. Now he understood neither had ever been true. Home had been sitting across the room all along. Lily watched him quietly. What did she write? He handed her the journal. After reading the sentence, she smiled through watery eyes. She'd be happy we're finally listening. That afternoon they drove to Emily's younger sister, Rachel, carrying several carefully packed boxes. Rachel opened the door expecting a quick visit. Instead, she found Graham holding Emily's old recipe binder. "I think these belong with someone who'll actually use them." Rachel ran her hand across the faded cover before pulling Graham into a hug. "I wondered if you'd ever be ready." "I wondered too." On the drive home, neither Graham nor Lily spoke very much. They didn't need to. Something heavy had been left behind, but nothing precious had been lost. The memories were still theirs. They simply no longer needed every object to prove it. Meanwhile, across town, Vivian sat quietly in the employee cafeteria instead of eating lunch in her private office. She watched parents leave on time to coach Little League games, attend parent-teacher conferences, or simply eat dinner with their families. The scheduling changes hadn't solved every problem. Some managers still complained. Productivity had dipped in a few departments before slowly recovering. The board still questioned whether flexibility was worth the cost. Vivian no longer answered those questions with spreadsheets alone. She answered them with people. She had learned that leadership wasn't measured only by how much a company could ask from its employees. It was also measured by what it refused to take from them. That evening Graham unlocked the apartment door carrying nothing but a small cardboard box. Inside was the leather journal. One family photograph. Emily's wedding ring, carefully stored for Lily someday. Everything else had found a new place. He set the box on the bookshelf instead of hiding it in a closet. Then he looked around the apartment. There was more empty space than before. Instead of feeling lonely, the room felt lighter. For the first time since Emily's death, Graham realized he hadn't been letting go of her. He had simply stopped asking yesterday to carry tomorrow. Spring arrived quietly. The maple trees outside Graham Holloway's apartment had begun to fill with fresh green leaves, and for the first time in years, he noticed them. Not because the trees had changed. Because he had finally slowed down enough to look. Life hadn't become easier. The new job at Harbor Technical Institute still paid less than his old position. Every month required careful budgeting. He had learned to compare grocery prices without embarrassment, postpone purchases that once seemed routine, and fix small things around the apartment instead of replacing them. There were no luxury vacations. No expensive dinners. No promotions waiting around the corner. And yet, every evening, he unlocked the apartment door before sunset. That simple habit had quietly become the richest part of his life. One Friday afternoon, Lily walked through the front door carrying a folded piece of paper. They posted the volunteer sign-up for next month's career day. Graham looked up from grading student projects. "Oh? They're looking for parents to talk about their jobs." He smiled. "I don't know how exciting logistics education sounds." Lily laughed. "You don't have to impress anybody." She handed him the form. "I just thought maybe it would be nice if everyone finally got to meet my dad." For a moment, Graham couldn't speak. There had been a time when Lily stopped asking him to attend school events because disappointment had become easier to manage than hope. Now she was inviting him. Not because she expected him to squeeze it into a crowded schedule. Because she already knew he would be there. "I'd love to," he finally said. She wrapped her arms around him without another word. Across town, Vivian Sinclair stood near the warehouse floor during a shift change. Employees walked past her carrying lunch boxes, backpacks, and jackets instead of rushing back toward another unexpected meeting. Some nodded. Some smiled. Others simply headed home to their families. The company was still demanding. Running a logistics business would never be simple. But the culture inside the building had begun to change in small, almost invisible ways. Managers scheduled fewer last-minute meetings. Parents no longer felt guilty for asking to attend school events. Supervisors were expected to solve staffing problems before asking employees to sacrifice family time. The transformation hadn't happened because of a public campaign or a dramatic speech. It happened one policy, one conversation, and one decision at a time. Vivian knew the company still had work to do. Leadership, she had learned, wasn't proven when people obeyed. It was proven when people no longer had to choose between doing good work and being present for the people they loved. She occasionally wondered how Graham was doing. She never called. Some chapters deserved to stay closed. A week later, Graham stood at the front of Lily's school auditorium as part of Career Day. The students asked questions about trucks, shipping routes, weather delays, and supply chains. He answered every one of them with patience. Near the end, a boy in the front row raised his hand. "If you had the best job before," the boy asked, "why did you leave?" The room grew quiet. Graham smiled gently. "I thought success meant never walking away from work." He paused before continuing. "Then I realized success doesn't mean much if the people you love only get what's left of you." The teacher thanked him, and the students applauded politely before filing out of the auditorium. As Graham packed his notes into a small canvas bag, Lily walked onto the stage. "You know," she said, "this is the first time anyone at school has seen you at one of my events without being surprised." He looked around the empty auditorium. Rows of folding chairs. A quiet stage. Sunlight spilling through the high windows. Nothing extraordinary. Everything important. "I spent a long time thinking I had to choose between being a good provider and being a good dad," he said. "What did you figure out?" Graham smiled. "I was asking the wrong question." Lily slipped her hand through his arm as they walked toward the exit together. Outside, the afternoon air was warm, and neither of them was in a hurry to be somewhere else. Months earlier, Graham had carried a cardboard box out of an office because someone believed fear would keep him there. He hadn't walked away because he knew exactly what the future would look like. He had walked away because he finally understood what he refused to lose. The future hadn't rewarded him with more money. It had rewarded him with ordinary days he no longer had to miss. And as he and Lily disappeared into the sunlight, Graham realized that sometimes the bravest decision isn't leaving a job. It's choosing a life you can actually be present to live.